Welcome to the Vault of Tales, a treasure trove of science fiction stories. Today, we bring you the story of a lone human mercenary who makes an impossible choice, saving an alien mother and her mysterious child from those who seek to control them. Hiding in the ruins of an ancient world, they begin a new life, but the past refuses to let them go. As visions of war and destruction unfold, he realizes that their survival is only the beginning of a much greater battle. Let's get started. Kevin Henderson's body ached as he pushed through the dense foliage of the alien jungle. His flight suit was torn in several places, revealing crimson scratches beneath. Every step he took on the unfamiliar terrain put him on edge. This planet, Marquis, wasn't in any known Union database. No maps, no distress signals, just the suffocating silence of the wilderness, and an eerie blue-green twilight settling over the sky. He glanced at the timer on his wrist. 3 days had passed since his ship had been shot down. Whoever attacked him remained a mystery, but survival was his immediate concern. Food, water, shelter, before exhaustion claimed him. Then, a sound, something unnatural, labored breathing, faint, yet strained. Instinct took over as he crouched low, weaving through thick, luminescent lichen-covered trunks. His pulse quickened when he finally caught sight of the source. A figure, tall, with long, tangled black hair, and skin shimmering with a faint silver-violet hue, was slumped against the base of a massive tree. Her armor was in tatters. A gash on her left arm glistened with blood, but what truly caught Kevin's attention was the infant cradled in her arms. The child was different. Large, golden eyes reflected the ambient light in an almost unnatural way, unlike its mother's uniform skin tone. Faint bioluminescent patterns pulsed across its tiny arms, as if responding to the energy around them. Kevin raised his hands, palms open. "I mean no harm." The woman, clearly a warrior, lifted her gaze, sharp and assessing. "Who are you?" Her voice was rough, hoarse from dehydration and fatigue. "Kevin, Union pilot. I crashed." He hesitated, glancing at her wounds. "You too?" She didn't answer immediately, her piercing stare sweeping over his torn flight suit, before tightening her grip on the child. A cold gust of wind rustled through the jungle, exposing fresh claw marks along her neck. Marks that told a story of a recent, desperate escape. Slowly, Kevin unfastened his pack, retrieving a water flask. "You need help, and so does the kid." The warrior held his gaze for a long moment, calculating. Then, at last, she reached forward, taking the flask with steady fingers. She sipped cautiously, before brushing a hand across the child's cheek. "My name is Liana," she said finally, "and we cannot stay here." Kevin nodded. He didn't know what had happened to her. But one thing was clear. If she was running, then something, or someone, was still hunting her. Liana sat with her back against a massive rock, her sharp gaze locked onto Kevin as he knelt beside the infant, inspecting it with careful precision. The child's tiny body shimmered with intricate bioluminescent veins, pulsing like living currents of energy. Every time Kevin's hand drew near, the glow rippled in response, as if sensing his presence. "This isn't normal," Kevin muttered, his brows furrowing. "Of course, it isn't." Liana held the child closer, a mix of wariness and deep concern in her eyes. "I don't know what to do with it." Kevin glanced up, surprised by her admission, a mother who didn't know how to care for her own child. Liana caught the unspoken question in his stare, her lips pressed into a thin line, conflict flickering in her expression before she exhaled heavily. "I am a warrior of telephone Quar. My life has been nothing but war and weapons. This child was never meant to exist, and yet, it is mine." Kevin studied her carefully, sensing the turmoil beneath her hardened exterior. He didn't know what had happened to her, but one thing was clear: no matter how unprepared she felt, she had no intention of abandoning this child. "We need to feed it." Kevin shifted the subject, trying to ease the tension. Liana gave him a look that suggested he had just said the most absurd thing in the galaxy. On this planet, Kevin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stood and surveyed their surroundings. The trees bore an unnatural hue, but some vegetation had familiar characteristics. If there were animal life here, then there had to be a sustainable food source. He drew a multi-purpose knife from his belt and made his way toward a small stream they had passed earlier. Along its banks, clusters of low shrubs bore pale blue fruits. Kevin plucked one, slicing it open and bringing it close to his nose. No strange chemical odors. He touched the translucent pulp, feeling its cool, slightly viscous texture. Don't tell me you're thinking of feeding it that. Liana crossed her arms, skepticism heavy in her voice. How else are we going to find out? Kevin shrugged. He pressed a sliver of the fruit to his lips, tasting cautiously. A mild sweetness, a slight tang, no burning or numbing sensation, which meant no immediate toxins. Liana watched him with lingering doubt, but Kevin ignored it and returned to the child. Carefully, he squeezed a few drops of juice into his palm, letting one bead touch the baby's lips. What happened next left them both stunned. The glowing veins on the infant's body pulsed more intensely, expanding in undulating waves, like ripples on a pond. The child stirred, its golden eyes fluttering open for the first time. A faint glimmer flickered in its gaze before it reached out, instinctively sucking on Kevin's fingertip, where traces of the juice remained. It likes it, Kevin exhaled, relieved. Liana remained wary, but her gaze softened just a fraction. She had never seen anyone else show concern for this child, let alone a human. The telephone choir had long considered Kevin's kind beneath them, and yet here he was, offering aid without hesitation. Kevin continued searching for more sustenance. Near the stream, he spotted a group of small creatures, part deer, part hare, with delicate glowing antlers. Moving carefully, he fashioned a rudimentary snare and managed to catch a juvenile. He gently extracted some of its milk, working with an efficiency that made Liana raise an eyebrow. "You've done this before?" "No, but I know how to adapt." Kevin handed her a small container. "See if it'll take this." Liana hesitated, then slowly dripped a few drops into the infant's mouth. The baby stirred, then eagerly began to suckle. For the first time since meeting Kevin, Liana looked at ease. As night fell, Kevin built a small fire, the blue flames casting eerie shadows against the twisted trees. Liana still cradled the child close, but she no longer kept the same wary distance from Kevin as before. "You can rest first. I'll keep watch," she murmured. "No need, we'll take turns." Kevin leaned back against the rock, gazing up at an unfamiliar sky littered with strange stars. A long silence stretched between them before Liana finally spoke, her voice quiet yet firm. "Thank you." Kevin glanced at her, then offered a small smile. Don't mention it, but deep down, he knew, it meant more than just gratitude. Morning arrived with an unsettling discovery. A short distance from their campsite, the ground bore unfamiliar tracks that didn't belong to him or Liana. Some were fresh, others were marked by scorch patterns on nearby tree trunks. Someone had been watching them, and time was running out. The pale morning light filtered through the towering canopy, casting an eerie greenish hue over the forest. Kevin crouched, his fingers brushing against the strange footprints embedded in the damp soil. These weren't from animals, the spacing and consistency were too precise, too deliberate. Whoever left them was intelligent, but what unsettled him more were the scorched marks seared into the nearby tree trunks, undeniable traces of energy weapons. Liana had sensed the danger as well. She stood motionless, her elongated ears twitching slightly, attuned to sounds beyond Kevin's perception. The child in her arms stirred, the bioluminescent veins on its small body pulsing faintly in the morning light. Kevin's voice was low, wary. "How much time do we have?" Liana's jaw tightened. "Not much." High above them, nestled within the dense foliage, a small mechanical bird, an autonomous scouting drone, observed in silence. A signal pulsed from its core, streaking upward through the atmosphere to a derelict destroyer lurking behind the clouds. Aboard the ship, Lagrange, the infamous bounty hunter, received the transmission. A crooked grin split his scarred face, his single good eye gleaming with malice. "Got you." A faint rustling of leaves sent a prickle down Kevin's spine. He raised a hand in warning, motioning for Liana to take cover behind the jagged boulders. The air had shifted, thick with a quiet stillness, a predator's silence. A sharp beep shattered the tension. Kevin barely had time to react before a spherical drone dropped from the canopy. Detonating on impact, the explosion sent dirt and debris flying, forcing them to duck for cover. From the underbrush, a squad of mercenaries emerged, weapons trained, moving with the precision of seasoned killers. A voice crackled through a nearby comm relay, cold, amused. "Hand over the child, and I might consider letting you live." Lagrange. Kevin glanced at Liana. Her grip on the child tightened, her expression steely. They both knew surrender wasn't an option. "You got a plan?" Kevin murmured. Liana's eyes flicked across the terrain, calculating. A direct fight? No chance. But a diversion? Kevin caught on immediately. His fingers closed around the compact energy emitter stashed in his pocket, a low-powered device. Weak enough to slip under enemy scanners but still capable of mimicking a bioenergy signature. Liana inhaled sharply, then bolted sideways, drawing the mercenaries' attention. At the same moment, Kevin activated the device and hurled it into the trees. A pulse rippled outward, broadcasting an energy signature identical to the child's. Instantly, the mercenaries' scanners flickered in response. "I've got a reading, southeast," one of them shouted. Lagrange hesitated for a split second. Then, "Go, find it." The squad pivoted, chasing the false lead. Kevin didn't waste a second. He sprinted toward Liana, grabbing her arm and pulling her into the shadowy depths of the ancient forest. Twisting roots formed a labyrinth around them, swallowing them whole as they disappeared into the wilderness. After what felt like an eternity of running, they finally stopped, breathless. Kevin scanned the area. No sign of pursuit. Liana carefully lowered the child. Keeping her weapon drawn, she regarded Kevin for a long moment, her wary distrust finally giving way to something else, respect. "You did well," Kevin exhaled, swiping sweat from his forehead. "I'm human. Improvisation is kinda our thing." Liana gave the faintest smirk, but it didn't last. They both knew the truth. Lagrange and his men weren't the type to give up. It was only a matter of time before they closed in again. "We can't keep running," she said, voice quieter now, thoughtful. "We need to know the truth. We need to find out what they're after." Kevin looked down at the child, its golden eyes unblinking, almost knowing. This was far from over. It had only just begun. The small fire flickered in the silent night, casting faint glimmers of light across the armor plating of Liana's suit. Kevin sat across from her, his gaze unfocused, lost in the dancing flames as his mind reeled from the strange visions that still clung to his thoughts. The child lay peacefully in its mother's arms, but even in sleep, its body emitted a soft glow, bioluminescent veins pulsing beneath delicate skin. Kevin pressed his fingers against his temples, trying to soothe the dull ache creeping through his skull. Every time he closed his eyes, images surged forward, visions of worlds unlike any he had ever known. Towering spires piercing the stratosphere, vast oceans reflecting a twilight sky of deep violet, colossal beings drifting through the void, their silent forms exuding an eerie sentience. These were not mere dreams. "You see them too, don't you?" Liana's voice was low, her eyes sharp in the firelight. Kevin exhaled, looking up at her. "The images, they keep appearing in my head. It doesn't feel like a dream, it feels like I'm there." Liana's gaze flickered down to the child, a shadow of unease crossing her face. "It's sharing its memories with you." Kevin narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, as if weighing the consequences of revealing the truth. Then, with a quiet sigh, she spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "This child is not just mine. It is the descendant of an ancient race, the architects." Kevin frowned. The name sounded like something pulled from myth, but there was no trace of fiction in Liana's tone. The architects, he echoed. She nodded, her fingers brushing over the child's skin. They were unlike anything you've ever encountered. More than just powerful beings, they could manipulate reality itself, matter, space, even time, through sheer will. Kevin remained silent, his mind racing to process the revelation. A part of him wanted to dismiss it, to call it impossible, but the visions in his mind whispered a different truth. He looked at the child. It slept soundly, but beneath its closed eyelids, its eyes twitched, lost in dreams of a past it had never lived. "What can it do?" he asked. Liana closed her eyes, as if searching for an answer buried in distant memories. "I don't know. Its bloodline is only part of what it is. It's still too young, but I can feel its power awakening." Kevin nodded slowly, but a deep unease settled in his chest. If what she said was true, then Lagrange and his men were the least of their worries. Greater forces would come looking for them. Then, without warning, the child stirred, a ripple of unseen energy pulsed outward, and in an instant, the fire before them flared violently, only to vanish, leaving behind smoldering embers. Both of them froze. In the darkness, the child's eyes fluttered open, not golden as before, but an abyss of infinite blackness, reflecting distant stars, and then, a sound, not a cry, not the incoherent babbling of an infant, a voice, ethereal, distant, echoing across the vastness of space and time. What was lost will return. A chill crawled down Kevin's spine. He turned to Liana, but she only stared at her child, her expression a strange mix of fear and belief. Their journey had only just begun, but Kevin knew, whatever secret they carried, it was far greater than anything he had ever imagined. The nocturnal forest lay silent, bathed in the faint glow of the pale moonlight filtering through the towering canopy. Jagged rocks and tangled roots sprawled across the uneven ground as Kevin moved forward cautiously. Sensing a shift in the air, the cold that crept into his skin wasn't just the chill of night, it carried something else. Something unseen, an energy slithering through the atmosphere like an invisible current. Liana clutched the child closer to her chest, her sharp gaze sweeping across the shadows. The infant was awake, its luminous eyes reflecting distant stars, while glowing patterns pulsed along its delicate skin, synchronizing with an unseen rhythm. Then, a faint green light flickered ahead. Kevin narrowed his eyes. "Do you see that?" Liana nodded, quickening her pace. The child stirred in her arms, tiny fingers stretching outward as if reaching for something. As they approached, the glow sharpened, revealing a structure entwined within the roots of a colossal tree, a black metal gateway. Smooth and seamless, its surface etched with spiraling patterns that emitted a dim phosphorescent sheen. It bore no hinges, no seams, no visible means of operation, yet it exuded an ancient, immeasurable power. The child's glow intensified, the patterns across its skin pulsed in perfect harmony with the inscriptions on the gate, as though they were speaking a silent, forgotten language. And then, the gate opened, no grinding metal, no mechanical groan, just an abyss slowly unfurling, a void that did not belong to this world. A force, invisible yet undeniable, pulled them in. Kevin barely had time to reach for Liana before darkness swallowed them whole. Kevin drifted in an endless expanse. There was no gravity, no air, only swirling ribbons of light stretching into infinity. He turned, spotting Liana floating beside him, clutching the child tightly, but the infant was no longer still, it was staring intently ahead. Then, the void erupted with light. A cascade of images surged into Kevin's mind, not random flashes, but memories. They saw them, tall beings clad in bio-organic armor, their forms imposing yet eerily graceful. The telephone quar, Liana's kin, but these weren't warriors standing in defiance. Their eyes brimmed not with pride, but with the weight of forbidden knowledge. A laboratory, enormous, hidden deep within a dead world. Machines hummed tirelessly, rows of containment pods glowing in eerie green, and at the heart of it all, a child, resting within a chamber, not a mere infant, but something different, a being forged from the lineage of the telephone quar and the ancient secrets of the architects. A voice, disembodied yet omnipresent, resonated through the void. We did it, we have touched eternity. The vision shifted. The telephone quar scientists argued, voices clashing in desperate urgency. Some bore the expressions of sheer horror, while others radiated an almost fanatical ambition. They had awakened something beyond their understanding. Then, chaos. An explosion ripped through the facility. Blood splattered across sterile walls. Screams reverberating through the corridors. Someone had betrayed them, triggered the facility's self-destruction to ensure the experiment never continued. The final image burned into Kevin's mind, a telephone quar woman. Face resolute, clutching the child as she fled through the inferno. Liana gasped sharply. She knew that woman, her mother. The vision shattered, slamming them back into reality. Kevin collapsed onto the forest floor, his heart pounding. Breath ragged, his body still trembled from the echoes of what he had just witnessed. Liana stood frozen, staring at the infant in her arms. Her lips parted, voice barely a whisper. This is why they hunt us. Kevin steadied himself, inhaling deeply before locking eyes with her. If that's true, then it's not just Lagrange. The entire galaxy will be coming for us. The air around them shifted the moment they emerged from the strange gateway. Kevin could feel it, an unseen force thrumming through the atmosphere, like something vast and unfathomable stirring from its slumber. Liana, still shaken by the visions they had just witnessed, held the child close, her grip tightening unconsciously. The infant, however, remained unnervingly still. There was no time to process what had just happened. The signs of danger were already manifesting. Kevin noticed it first, as they navigated the dense forest, trying to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the gateway. Something on the ground caught his attention. Strange symbols had begun to appear, interlocking circles and symmetrical spirals etched into the dirt. At first, he thought they were natural patterns left by the wind or shifting earth. But their precision was too deliberate, too methodical. Do you see this? He gestured toward the markings. Liana crouched down, her expression darkening. This isn't natural. When did they appear? Kevin exhaled sharply. I don't know, but I've got a feeling. A sound cut through the night. It wasn't the rustling of leaves or the distant call of nocturnal creatures. It was something else entirely, a high-frequency resonance, almost imperceptible, yet sharp enough to send a dull ache through Kevin's skull. He turned his head sharply. The child was staring at them, its eyes aglow with a faint, otherworldly light, and then Kevin understood. The markings weren't random. The child had made them. Liana knelt beside the symbols, running her fingers over the intricate lines, trying to decipher their meaning. The moment her fingertips brushed against one of the patterns, something flashed through her mind. A vision. A group of heavily armed figures moved through the forest, scanning the terrain with ruthless precision. One of them walked with an unnatural gait, his cybernetic eye glowing crimson as it flickered through multiple scanning modes. Lagrange. Liana's breath hitched, her pulse quickening. They're coming. Kevin reacted instantly, his plasma pistol sliding smoothly into his grip. How long? Liana turned to the child. It was emitting the same eerie frequency, but now the symbols on the ground were shifting, circles contracting, spirals straightening, merging into a single directional arrow, pointing westward. Kevin met Liana's gaze. I'm guessing that means run. She didn't hesitate. Then let's go. They moved swiftly through the dense undergrowth, guided only by the symbols left behind. The night around them was silent, save for their controlled, measured footsteps. Then, the hum of anti-grav engines shattered the stillness. A crimson beam sliced through the darkness, thermal scanners sweeping the area. Kevin instinctively pulled Liana down behind the massive roots of an ancient tree. Above them, on a small ridge, Lagrange stood with his cybernetic eye flashing like a predator locking onto its prey. Kevin gritted his teeth. He knew Lagrange wasn't just after the bounty. He wanted what the child carried, the knowledge, the power, and that made him far more dangerous. A sharp beep sounded from Lagrange's wrist-mounted scanner. He lifted his head, his lips curling into a slow, knowing smirk, his gaze fixed on a point not far from where Kevin and Liana had just passed. "We've got a trail." They ran, deeper and deeper into the night. Every breath, every step, was a delicate balance between survival and the ever-looming threat behind them. But the child, somehow, continued to guide them, leading them down unseen paths, away from danger. At last, as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, they spotted a massive cave, hidden within the jagged formations of an ancient ravine. Liana stared into the shadowed entrance, a strange sense of familiarity washing over her. "We can take shelter here." Kevin exhaled, his shoulders relaxing just a fraction, but he knew better than to believe they were safe. This was only a temporary reprieve. The truth was still out there, waiting to be uncovered, and they weren't done running, not yet. The first light of dawn cast a crimson hue over the entrance of the rocky cave, painting the jagged walls in shades of burning amber. Liana peered outside, narrowing her eyes as she scanned the gradually brightening sky. No sign of Lagrange or his men, yet, but she knew time was working against them. "We can't stay here any longer," she said, urgency lacing her voice. Kevin nodded. "We need a ship." Marquis wasn't exactly the ideal place to find transport, but bounty hunters weren't always careful with their landings. If Lagrange had tracked them here, then there had to be a ship somewhere nearby. They moved swiftly across the rusted remains of an abandoned mining outpost, a relic from a time when this world had once been a waypoint for traders on the fringe of the galaxy. Most of it was nothing more than corroded metal and decaying machinery. But then, Kevin spotted something different, half buried beneath layers of dust and sand. Concealed within the wreckage, a ship, a CORSAIR-9. It was an old model, a lightweight transport vessel, built for speed rather than combat. If they were lucky, they could get it airborne before anyone noticed. Liana rushed to the external control panel, brushing her fingers over faded inscriptions. "It still has power." Kevin didn't hesitate. He climbed into the cockpit, fingers moving quickly over the manual startup sequence. The displays flickered to life, and an aged AI voice crackled through the speakers. "Emergency startup detected. Systems check complete. Engines operational at 67% capacity. Enough to get us off this rock." Kevin muttered. Liana secured the child in a safety harness at the back of the cockpit. But as she turned away, a faint hum resonated through the ship's controls. The screens flickered, lines of code scrambled and reformed. The entire vessel trembled. Kevin frowned. What the hell? The child was staring straight at the console. Faint patterns of light pulsed across its skin, reflecting the shifting data on the screens. Strange symbols, ones Kevin had never seen in any known programming language, flashed for an instant. And then, the ship fully powered up. "No way," Kevin breathed. Liana spun around, eyes wide in disbelief. "Did it just do that?" The child remained silent, but in its eyes, Kevin swore he saw galaxies reflected in their depths. The moment their ship lifted off from Marquis, a shrill alarm blared through the cockpit. Unidentified vessel approaching. Kevin clenched his jaw. Lagrange was faster than expected. A predator's shadow cut through the thinning atmosphere. A sleek, menacing hunter ship, sharp-edged and built for pursuit. On the radar display, Kevin saw the unmistakable insignia blinking in cold, ruthless precision. Lagrange never abandoned a chase. "Hold on to the kid," Kevin yelled, yanking the controls. The CORSAIR-9 wasn't a warship, but it was fast. That was their only advantage. A barrage of green laser fire seared through the void behind them. Lagrange had them locked. Liana frantically scanned the controls. "We don't have weapons. We can't fight back." Kevin gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his brow. "Then we outrun him." He wrenched the ship into a sharp dive, skimming the edge of a dense asteroid field. Chunks of rock tumbled in chaotic motion, forming a deadly maze. But Lagrange didn't flinch. He followed. Kevin pushed the Corsair 9 to its limits, twisting and weaving through the debris. But Lagrange was relentless. No matter how many sharp turns they made, he stayed locked on their tail. Then, something changed. The ship's flight controls suddenly shifted on their own. "I'm not doing this," Kevin shouted. On the navigation display, new flight paths appeared, impossibly intricate, threading through the asteroid field in ways no human pilot could manage. Kevin glanced over his shoulder. The child was no longer passive. The bioluminescent veins on its skin glowed brighter, and the instant it opened its eyes, the Corsair 9 moved with unnatural precision. It twisted through gaps between tumbling asteroids, its trajectory unfolding as if it had been calculated long before they even arrived. Even Lagrange, an apex hunter, couldn't keep up. One miscalculation, 1 second too slow, and his ship slammed into the denser part of the asteroid belt. Kevin flicked his gaze to the radar. Lagrange's vessel was spiraling. Forced into a desperate recovery, the distance between them stretched. They were free. For now. Liana let out a shaky breath, her gaze still locked on the child. It just saved us. Kevin's grip on the controls tightened. His heart was still hammering against his ribs. He looked toward the vast expanse of space stretching endlessly before them. They had escaped, but he knew this wasn't over. The space ahead of them shifted, as the ship slipped free from the asteroid field and into the silent expanse of the cosmos. The planet before them emerged, a ghostly silhouette adrift among the stars. Its color was unlike any world Kevin had ever seen. A silvery gray hue blanketed its surface, as if the entire planet had been swallowed by the ashes of time. Slow-moving storms churned in the upper atmosphere, trailing faint arcs of lightning that flickered and died in an instant. Liana peered through the viewport, her gaze unwavering. "We're here." Kevin frowned. "Are you sure this is the place?" She nodded. This world was once called HFY, an ancient research hub for the Scholar clans. If there's any clue to the child's origins, it will be here. Kevin didn't argue. After everything they had witnessed, if there was even a chance to understand what was really happening, he was willing to take the risk. The Corsair 9 touched down on XYPHOS-9's ashen surface, kicking up swirling clouds of silver dust. The sky above was veiled in an eerie, static-charged haze, giving the unsettling impression that this world was wrapped in some kind of cosmic cocoon. Kevin stepped down carefully, the air around him thick with an unnatural stillness. There were no signs of life, no vegetation, no movement, only the skeletal remains of a civilization long abandoned. Liana followed, cradling the child in her arms. She brushed her fingers gently over its small frame, feeling the strange pulsing light beneath its skin. The glowing patterns flickered rhythmically, as if resonating with something unseen. "We're in the right place," she murmured. They moved through the ruins, past towering research spires that had once pierced the sky but now lay in rusting decay. On a vast stone wall, Kevin spotted something, deeply etched markings that hadn't been carved by human hands, but by a technology far beyond their understanding. Liana pressed her fingertips against the inscriptions. She recognized them instantly, the language of the architects. "They left us a message," she whispered, voice trembling, as her fingers traced the ancient symbols. The engravings began to glow, and then, a voice, soft yet resounding, filled the air, not emanating from any device, but seeping into their very consciousness. "The last of our kind, if you are hearing this, it means we have failed." A chill ran down Kevin's spine. "You carry the final spark of the architect race, but you are also the target of those who seek to erase our legacy." Liana inhaled sharply. Sudden flashes of images burned into their minds, ancient scholars standing over a biopod, its surface pulsating with blue light. Inside, a small form lay cradled within the glow. It was unmistakable. The child, the very same child in her arms. Kevin turned to look at it, realization dawning like a supernova. This child wasn't just Liana's. It was the key to an entire species' rebirth. Liana staggered back, fear tightening around her like a vice. "If this is true," her voice was hoarse, "it will never stop being hunted." Kevin clenched his fists. He understood exactly what she meant. Lagrange hadn't just been after a bounty. He knew what the child was, and he wouldn't stop. Before them, the ruins stood silent, ancient sentinels of a long-forgotten past, while the future remained an enigma. But Kevin knew one thing for certain. They couldn't run forever. The sky of XYPHOS-9 burned. From the edge of space, streaks of crimson light slashed through the ashen atmosphere like the vengeful blades of forgotten gods. Kevin and Liana had only minutes to prepare before Lagrange's bounty hunter ships tore through the planet's fragile exosphere, their ion engines howling like the cries of ravenous beasts. From a rocky outcrop, Kevin watched as 4 sleek warships descended, their thrusters kicking up whirlwinds of silver-gray dust. The lead ship's hatch hissed open, and out stepped Lagrange, death incarnate, clad in black armor, the synthetic glow of his cybernetic eye reflecting the fiery exhaust plumes behind him. He had come, and this time, there was no escape. Kevin tightened his grip around his old plasma pistol, but he knew full well that firepower alone wouldn't get them out of this. Lagrange hadn't come alone. He had brought an elite hunting squad, killers who had tracked them across stars, through war zones and dead worlds, all leading to this final confrontation. Beside him, Liana clutched the child, feeling the strange rhythmic pulses beneath its delicate skin. The child did not tremble in fear. Instead, its eyes glowed faintly, symbols flickering across them, ancient runes forming and dissolving, as though something buried deep within its mind was awakening. Lagrange took a step forward, his voice cutting through the desolate silence. "The game's over, Liana." From his belt, he drew a long obsidian blade, its surface etched with eerie symbols, marks of a long-dead civilization. A weapon not just designed to pierce flesh, but to sever something deeper. "Hand over the child," he said, his gloved fingers flexing, his stance coiled like a predator ready to strike. "Or all of you die here." Liana did not answer. There had never been a choice. Instead, she pressed the child into Kevin's arms, whispering only 2 words, "Run." Then, without warning, she lunged. The 2 figures collided in a violent blur. Lagrange's blade slashed through the air, but Liana dodged, ducking low and sweeping a kick toward his ribs. He staggered back a step but did not fall. He was too skilled for that. Too experienced. He retaliated with a brutal punch, slamming into Liana's side. She faltered, gasping in pain, but refused to fall. Kevin didn't wait to see what happened next. He ran, clutching the child, sprinting toward the ruins where the ancient glyphs still glowed faintly in the dim light. As he neared, the symbols began to brighten, pulsing in sync with the child's presence. Something was activating, something old, something waiting. Come on," he whispered, pressing a shaking hand against the runes. The world shattered. A shockwave tore through XYPHOS-9, an invisible force rippling across the desolate surface. The ground split apart, chasms yawned open, spewing brilliant arcs of blue energy into the storm-dark sky. Lagrange's cybernetic eye flickered as he realized what was happening. He hissed, rage twisting his features. No. He lunged, aiming to strike Liana down in one final blow, but before the blade could find its mark, a barrier of shimmering energy erupted between them, sealing them apart. The planet trembled one last time. Then, everything went dark. Kevin gasped awake. He was lying on a smooth, glass-like surface, no longer the dust-ridden wasteland of XYPHOS-9, but a crystalline ground that shimmered under an ambient glow. The air was weightless, untouched by time. Liana was only a few feet away, struggling to her knees, breathing heavily. She was alive, and the child. Kevin looked down. The markings on its skin shone brighter than ever, their luminescent patterns shifting in ways he couldn't understand. He pushed himself up, scanning the unfamiliar horizon. They were no longer on XYPHOS-9. The planet was gone. In its place stood a world unlike any charted in the galaxy. Was this a sanctuary of the creators? Or a prison, locked away from all who might seek them? Questions swirled in Kevin's mind, but none came with answers. Only one thing was certain. Their journey was far from over. There was no horizon, no stars shimmered in the sky, no distant sun cast its light. This world hung in a state of suspension, where everything floated in the void yet maintained a strange, deliberate order, as if an unseen will held it all together. Preventing collapse, Kevin stepped forward, his boots pressing against a surface as smooth as liquid glass. Yet beneath his feet, there was weight, solidity, as though you were walking on something real. There was no wind, no whisper of nature, only the eerie glow of swirling blue veins pulsing across the towering structures that rose from the ground. They were monolithic, obsidian black, reflecting nothing but the shifting, luminous patterns flowing like currents beneath their surface. Liana stood nearby, cradling the child in her arms, but she was no longer trembling. Something had changed. Kevin lifted his gaze, searching for a landmark, anything to anchor himself, to make sense of this place. But all he saw was a distorted landscape of bending space and fractured time. An abstract painting of a reality untethered from the physical laws he once knew. "Where are we?" His voice carried no echo. It didn't travel through the air, it simply existed, fading as quickly as it formed. Liana didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the child. The child was no longer afraid, no longer curled up as it had been on XYPHOS9. Instead, its eyes gleamed, twin orbs of radiant light, reflecting the strange environment around them in ways no ordinary being should. Glowing lines had begun etching themselves into its skin, mirroring the same shifting patterns that adorned the black towers. It was becoming one with this place. "This isn't a new planet," Liana whispered, her voice tinged with reverence. "We're inside something." Kevin frowned. "Inside what?" She shook her head. "I don't know, but I can feel it. This place isn't just a world. It's another layer of reality, one only those of the architect's bloodline can enter." Kevin scanned the landscape once more, and for the first time, he felt it, an unseen presence, ancient beyond comprehension, a realm not built from matter, but from intent, from the will of something that had existed before time itself. And the child was the key. Then, the ground trembled, a subtle vibration, rippling outward, the glowing veins across the glassy terrain flared to life, intertwining, spiraling into elaborate, shifting glyphs. The child lifted its hand. The moment its tiny fingers reached into the empty air, a column of blinding light erupted from the center of this world, stretching infinitely upwards, as though piercing the very fabric of the cosmos. Within the radiant cascade, symbols appeared, ancient sigils that spun and danced, a celestial waltz written in the language of creation itself. And then, a voice. It had no source, no origin, it didn't come from any direction, it simply was, resonating within their very minds. "The blood of the architects has returned." Kevin's pulse hammered in his chest. "Who are you?" he asked. No answer. The column of light began shifting, its form twisting, retracting, until it molded into a humanoid figure. But it was no ordinary being. It was made entirely of pure light, its eyes burning like sapphire stars, its hair flowing like nebulae adrift in space. Kevin instinctively stepped back. Liana went rigid, holding her breath, but the child did not fear it. It took a step forward, reaching out a tiny hand. The luminous entity did the same. Their fingers met, and in that instant, Kevin's mind shattered. Visions surged through him like a maelstrom, planets crumbling under the weight of unseen forces. Machines the size of moons drifting in the void, constructing new realities from the raw essence of the cosmos. He saw a civilization that had once held dominion over existence itself, only to collapse under the sheer gravity of the knowledge they wielded. And above all, he saw the truth. The child was not merely the descendant of the architects. It was the answer. When Kevin's consciousness returned, the being of light was gone, but the symbols still lingered, weaving through the air like celestial phantoms. And the child was different. It was no longer a fragile, nameless infant. It had awakened. Liana's fingers tightened around Kevin's hand. He turned to her, and in her eyes, he saw the same realization. There was no going back. They were no longer just fugitives. They had become part of something far greater than themselves. The space around them gradually settled after the luminous entity vanished, yet the echoes of what Kevin had seen remained indelible in his mind. Visions of a fallen civilization, of colossal machines weaving the fabric of reality itself, and of the child, not just a descendant of the architects, but a vital link in the fate of the galaxy. All of it left him standing at the precipice of a choice from which there was no return. Slowly, he turned to Liana. There was still a trace of worry in her eyes, a shadow of unspoken fears, but the hesitation was gone. She had made her decision long ago. She would never abandon the child. Not now, not ever. But for Kevin, the path was not so clear. "If we stay, there's no going back," he said, his voice low in the unnatural stillness of this place. "Do you still want to return to the world of men?" Liana asked. There was no judgment in her tone, no accusation, only the simple understanding that Kevin had never belonged to something as unfathomable as this. Kevin fell silent. Go back. The idea was tempting. A part of him still longed for the mundane, the quiet solitude of a nameless cargo ship drifting through the void, the warmth of a meal in some forgotten outpost, the simplicity of conversations with people who knew nothing of the horrors hidden within the fabric of the universe. But how could he return now? He had seen too much. The child stood there, its glowing eyes reflecting distant stars, but there was something else now, something calm, something knowing. It understood his turmoil. Kevin remembered what it had done, the symbols it had drawn in warning, the strange sounds guiding them away from Lagrange's grasp, and most of all, the path it had shown them to this place, a world beyond reach, a world beyond control. They could stay, they could disappear, they could build a life here, beyond the reach of hunters and warlords who saw the child as nothing more than a tool, a weapon to be wielded. But one day, someone would come. Kevin knew that the universe would never allow power like this to exist unchallenged. Lagrange had been the first, but he would not be the last. Others would follow, stronger, crueler, willing to burn entire worlds to claim the child's gift. And if he left, if he walked away, who would protect it? Who would stand between the galaxy and those who sought to wield its power for their own ends? His eyes met Liana's once more, and in that moment, the war within him ended. The choice had been made long before he ever admitted it to himself. "We stay," he said. Liana gave a single nod. Time flowed differently in this place. There was no rising or setting sun, no cycle of day and night, only silent currents of luminous energy weaving through floating structures. As if the entire world was a colossal, breathing entity, Kevin and Liana learned to adapt. They built a shelter within the ancient ruins, an underground chamber, where the temperature and atmospheric pressure remained stable thanks to dormant machines still functioning after millions of years. Liana, with her understanding of alien technology, gradually uncovered ways to interact with the systems of this place, while Kevin scoured for sustenance, organic crystallized energy, which could be absorbed directly. And the child, it was evolving, not in the way a normal child would, but in a manner beyond the grasp of conventional science. It had begun to communicate, not just with words, but through thoughts, through images imprinted directly into Kevin and Liana's minds. It was no longer just a child. It was becoming something else, something far beyond human. One day, as Kevin was inspecting a dome-like structure outside their shelter, the child approached him. It raised its hand, and the world shifted. Ancient symbols ignited across the ground, pulsing with energy, and in that instant, Kevin saw colossal ships tearing through the void, carrying those who sought the child, battles of fire and destruction raging across distant worlds, and in the end, a being of light, like the one they had encountered before, standing amidst a shattered expanse of space, where time and reality were unraveling, where civilizations would have to decide their fate. Kevin staggered back, heart pounding. He turned to the child. It said nothing, but he understood. The war wasn't over. They could hide for now, as long as they wished. But one day, the enemy would come. Kevin clenched his fists. A new beginning didn't mean a peaceful ending, but at least now, they had a chance to prepare. He looked at Liana. We can build a life here. But one day, you know it too, we'll have to fight. She didn't answer, she only took his hand and held it tight. Above them, in the strange sky of this world, streams of light continued to drift, as if reality itself was waiting for the day they would step out of the shadows and face their destiny.